Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengausen. Today, September 15th, there are a lot of interesting news stories. In this episode, the Kremlin is officially threatening European officials with physical violence over its frozen assets. Russia is destabilizing Moldova ahead of the elections using Arok priests and armies of bots. Meanwhile, NATO is once again discussing closing the skies over Ukraine. Yet again, and in Russia, they're running out of air defense systems and have to ask for them back from those they already sold them to. All this and more. Today's episode will be packed with interesting topics, so if you're new to this channel, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So after the drone incident in Poland, the West should consider the possibility of intercepting Russian drones and missiles in Ukrainian airspace. This was stated by Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. Well, look, he expressed his personal opinion. He said, if you ask me personally, we should be thinking and talking about this. Technically, NATO and the EU are capable of this, but Poland cannot make such a decision alone, only together with its allies. Naturally, now Orban will pop up and say, this is World War III. We have no right, let them fly into our territory. They won't do us any harm, these drones and missiles, and in general, all of this devious Ukraine is somehow deflecting them over there. Of course, all of this will happen, but this statement that NATO or the European Union could close off part of the sky over Ukraine, at least over part of it, and shoot down drones, well, it makes sense to shoot them down before these drones start reaching their territory. This has greatly alarmed the Kremlin. At this point, an ancient evil awoke in the form of deputy head of the Russian Security Council, Medvedev. And the Ethel Gnome delivered a new batch of terrifying threats. Medvedev declared that a war with Russia would begin if NATO started shooting down drones over Ukraine. Well, how exactly would that start? A NATO war with Russia? Because ever since the full-scale invasion, Russian television has been saying that Russia is constantly at war with NATO. So when exactly is it supposed to start if Peskov just today stated that Russia is de facto at war with NATO? You guys need to get your stories straight and coordinate your versions. Well, and secondly, regarding the war with NATO that will start if they shoot down with NATO weapons. A brief excursion into history. We heard that war will start if HIMARS is delivered to Ukraine. Has the war started? No. Drones? Has the war started? No. Tanks? There will be war. That's it, just put in the tanks. Has the war started? No. Planes? Did it start? No. Missiles? Storm Shadow Scalp Attackmas. Has the war started? No. The war will start. It will start right away if missiles begin to hit Russian military targets in the occupied territory, for example. Has the war started? No. If they start hitting Russian territory, well, officially recognized Russian territory, that will definitely be 200% war. The war has started? No. Putin, in fact, should have already started applying his entire nuclear doctrine, not just fighting NATO. Especially when the armed forces of Ukraine entered the Kursk region, or when they began systematically destroying the Russian Federation's nuclear triad. Remember Operation Putin? No war will start. They'll close the skies over half of Ukraine or even the whole of Ukraine. Medvedev will be making a fuss over there. And that's where it will all end. Putin himself is terribly afraid of a war with NATO, but unfortunately NATO is much more afraid of him, and that's sad. So I read this statement and thought, wow, you guys have really gone overboard with the threats here. Medvedev also stated that as a result of the transfer of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, Russia will, and I quote, pursue EU states until the end of time in all possible international and national courts, and in some cases even through extrajudicial means. Here, this is already an open threat of physical violence against European officials by extrajudicial means. That's exactly what deal with means here, as in, just try it and we'll poison you with Novichok like the Skripals, or come up with something else. So let me just remind you that through Medvedev's mouth, Putin periodically voices things he can't say himself. And if after such threats that will hunt you down and deal with you extrajudicially, there is no strong response, it means Europe has accepted the threat, swallowed it, and is allowing for such a scenario. By the way, in my opinion, there are only 3 organizations capable of firmly putting representatives of the terrorist state, the Russian Federation, in their place. Only three organizations are capable of this. They are the GUR, the SBU, and Mossad. As they say, feel free to reach out. And let me remind you, friends, we have an important fundraiser for the separate Bohdan Khmelnytsky Brigade, which is fighting on probably the hottest front right now, the Pokrovsk direction. We've practically completed this fundraiser already. I ask you, please, let's pull together just a little more, because every donation you make could save someone's life, the lives of our heroes. They are protecting us, so let's help them. The donation details are in the description of this video. There's Mono, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And there's also Private Bank. Please, friends, we don't have much left to go. And on the eve of the parliamentary elections in Moldova, which, let me remind you, are scheduled for September 28th, Russia is starting to actively destabilize the situation in the country. I mean, they've been actively doing this before, but now they're stepping it up. Some kind of just really exotic tools, combat mages as I call them, clergy from the Russian Orthodox Church. We'll get to them in a moment, but first, let's look at what's happening overall. This is important because right now Russia is testing most, if not all, of its tools for influencing the politics of another country on Moldova. In general, the president of Moldova, Maia Sandu, stated that Russia is using Orthodox priests for hybrid influence, an extensive bot network known as Matryoshka, and is also trying to incite riots in prisons through criminal elements in order to destabilize the situation. Basically, this very bot network uses what's called the doppelganger technology, meaning they create websites that are copies of reputable news sources. A site might completely copy CNN, BBC, or Reuters, but there will be one altered page on it, and that's where it happens. That's where the fake news appears, which the bots start to spread. So when you look at your feed, a bot posts a link to CNN. It says that Maia Sandu owns 58 yachts somewhere in Italy, and you think, oh, well, it's CNN, so we just take it at face value. You read the headline and everything seems clear. You look at the interface and it looks like CNN. So this is exactly the doppelganger technique, when mirrors of official news websites are created, but on a different domain. So what makes this possible? On a domain that looks very similar to CNN, for example, CNN or BBC, they might add an extra letter, so it becomes CNNN, for instance. And you won't notice because it'll be in the address bar. Who even looks at that? This address. Although, well, some people do pay attention to it nowadays, actually. And this is how they mislead people and launch dozens or even hundreds of advertising campaigns, and so on. So basically, Russia is testing various schemes on Moldova. This month, or rather last month, a very interesting scheme was exposed. It was done through an application that was created called the Sombre. They created a platform called Tai2 through Telegram, which paid people money for various activities. For example, go to a protest. Here's some money for you. It'll be credited to your crypto wallet, and so on. The whole system is backed by the pro-Russian oligarch Shor. He just won't give up. At one point he fled first to Israel, and now, in 2024, he got a Russian passport, is sitting in Russia, and is still trying by some roundabout way to bribe all these paid representatives. It's unclear who exactly he wants to bring out onto the streets. I watched a bunch of videos. Some of them are just completely out of it, like Soviet-era pensioners who don't even know what they want themselves. They come out for money. There's a whole network and even stores for them, so they can buy things with their social cards and so on. Basically, they've set up this network and are trying to destabilize Moldova because they understand, and Sandu says, that these parliamentary elections on September 28th are crucial. After them, Moldova will finally move toward the European vector, and for Russia, it will be much harder to exert influence. That's why enormous resources are being poured in to try to influence these elections. Well, as for the participation of Arok priests, it's long been known that this is a branch of the FSB. By using the church, Russia spreads its influence in various countries, engages in espionage, and recruits people. For example, by a strange coincidence, the Russian Orthodox Church in Norway and Sweden buys land for its parishes close to NATO bases, military airfields, and headquarters. There was a whole major investigation into this topic by the Logistics Center. By the way, some clergy members have been expelled from countries precisely on the grounds of being a threat to national security. So there's no need to have any illusions that they're engaged in some kind of benevolent activity there, that's all. Especially considering that the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, has called Russia's war against Ukraine a holy war. And let me tell you this. The Russian Orthodox Church has probably done even more to normalize this war than Russian propagandists themselves. That's why special attention is needed, and there's no need to be polite with these clergy members who have immediately revealed their true colors. And you know what's good? That Russia, realizing that Moldova is finally leaving its sphere of influence, is now exposing all these spy sleeper agents. So as you wait, don't hesitate. Send them all back in droves to love their homeland. And by the way, I recently thought, let me go and check out their so-called main military church. It operates in Russia. For those who don't know, in Russia there is the main military church of the Russian Orthodox Church, a khaki-colored painted monster with domes. Everything there is about symbolism and numbers, dates are encrypted everywhere. Just imagine, the main military church. So I went to their website to see what they're actually doing there. And let me tell you, I found some extremely interesting details. I discovered them while preparing. While getting ready for today's program, I browsed through their pages. You can check them out too. They even have a symbolism page where they explain why the tower is a certain height, why the diameter is what it is. The domes, everything is tied to military dates. For example, the number of days since the war began determines the length, the number of days until it ended determines something else, the number of days of occupation means there will be that many steps, and so on. I've already mentioned that they plan to have frescoes of Putin and Stalin there, but I found something new. This is something you'll really like, and it's straight from their website. This information is from the website of the main military cathedral, which is located in Patriot Park. The northern and southern gates are designed as reliefs depicting scenes from the Great Patriotic War. Well, that's what they call it. They refer to it as a part of World War II. The northern gates are dedicated to the beginning of the war. The southern gates, the gates of victory, depict archangels and a sword thrust in, which also serves as a handle shaped like a fascist eagle. Are you all sick over there or something? So you get it, right? A sword with some kind of fascist eagle. This is all on the doors of a church. And the main icon of the church is called the Mandilion, the image not made by hands. The icon was painted using ancient techniques on wooden boards made from the gun carriage of a cast-iron cannon from 1710, which was raised from the bottom of the Neva River. But on the backside of the board, there are boards fastened together with the fore-end of an automatic rifle, a Tokarev. On the stock of one of them, the year 1944 is inscribed, and the acceptance mark arrow in a star of the Izhevsk mechanical plant has been preserved. The main icon painted on cannon carriages is fastened at the back with the fore-end of a rifle. They're all crazy over there. I'm serious, I just can't understand what they're doing there any other way. Well, and about this church, if you're interested, read up on it. Tank tracks are even fused into the steps there. I don't know what it reminds me of, some kind of temple from the movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. There are skulls and all sorts of other things here. Is that really what this church looks like, or am I missing something? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It really helps. It helps with promotion, and there will be many interesting episodes coming soon. By the way, Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, in that same interview, suggested another very simple but painful thing for Russia. Sikorski proposed not letting the Russian shadow fleet into the Baltic Sea at all. According to him, Germany or Nato could create a maritime control zone in the North Sea to restrict access for these shadow fleet tankers to the Baltic Sea. And he warned that the sinking of even one of these tankers could lead to a colossal disaster of unprecedented scale. That's true. And let me remind you that earlier Russia stated that just like the creation of a no-fly zone over the western part of Ukraine, as well as a blockade of shipping in the Baltic Sea, will be regarded as a declaration of war. I've told you 100 times, they won't go to war. They've already declared it 100 times. And I've listed the points, there are many more of them, after which there was no war at all. But I think everything is much simpler and more mundane. Considering the methods the Russians use, I think the information was passed on long ago, and it reached where it needed to go. Are you going to block the Russian shadow fleet? Whether it's in the Danish Straits, the North Sea, it doesn't matter where, one of the tankers will accidentally crack in the Baltic Sea or somewhere in the Danish Straits. And it will be filled to the brim with Russian oil, but it will be a disaster of unprecedented scale. I think they sent this signal like an accidental man-made disaster will happen, the flag will be from Palau or some other country. We're not involved. Well, it's just an old tanker. That's why I think this is exactly what Russia is threatening with. In fact, it's kind of an equivalent to a dirty bomb. The Russians don't care. Really, they don't care because they've already split 2 tankers themselves, river, sea. They still can't collect the fuel oil, neither on the Crimean coast nor in Anapa. No one cares at all. Has anyone heard of eco-activists or anyone else coming out? Yeah, no one cares. That's just how they always live. But for Europeans, this would be a huge disaster. So I think these kinds of threats are really just for them. Here, Medvedev is threatening with physical violence, so why not threaten with a catastrophe like this? And there's one more statement I'd like to draw attention to. Also from the same Radosław Sikorski, that no one wants to fight with Russia. I quote, "Security guarantees for Ukraine, which are currently being discussed, are unlikely to work in the event of a new Russian invasion, since there are no volunteers in the West to fight Russia." Well, according to him, the idea behind such guarantees is to deter Russia from launching a new attack. And the troops of the guarantor countries will have to stand in defense of Ukraine, to be stationed in certain regions, but of course, they will not actually fight. That's why, well, actually, by the way, I really like this ending to his statement. If we provide Ukraine with security guarantees, we are saying that we might start a war against Russia. And I don't think that's convincing, that there's any trust in it. Anyone who wants to fight Russia can start doing so right now. But I don't see anyone willing. How's that? And what about the coalition of the willing? It does exist. Well, he said that there are currently no volunteers in Europe willing to fight Russia. In general, among normal civilized people, there are no volunteers eager to fight anyone. No normal country wants to go to war. We didn't want to either, but it's the abnormal lunatics who do. As for security guarantees, well, right now, even NATO itself doesn't have a guarantee of security, that they would all come to the defense. All as one if suddenly Russia attacks one of the NATO countries. I could be wrong, but that's the feeling I have. That is, judging by the reaction to the drones in Poland, the response could be very unexpected for the one who is attacked. Trump could very well say, "This isn't my war. This is a war between Putin and Poland. This is a war whose preconditions were laid back in the Soviet era." He could say it's a war between Putin and Lithuania. And a lot will depend on that reaction. I'm sure that no Orban would ever in his life come to the defense of someone attacked by Putin, judging by his position. Well, in general, right now there is one participant among NATO countries whose tough response I am certain of. That's Turkey and also Ukraine, which has real experience of striking Putin right in his Botox-filled bunker. That's why, if I were in the place of Russia's neighbors, even those who are part of the alliance, I would seriously consider creating a new, truly effective and decisive one. Most importantly, a decisive military alliance which would definitely include Ukraine. So the first guarantee of security is a military alliance, a real military alliance without Blackjack and Orban. Ideally, this military alliance should also include at least one nuclear state. Well, in our case, that could be France or the United Kingdom. See, I'm not even mentioning the US, I'm leaning more toward the UK, since they also have a strong naval component. And the second possible security guarantee, actually, I'd probably say this is the primary one in terms of importance. This is a powerful long-range weapon that, if necessary, could wipe the Kremlin off the face of the earth if it were used, even along with its elderly inhabitants. Just like how Putin handed over nuclear weapons to Lukashenko, at least that's what he claimed, it's exactly the same scheme. That is, a sufficient number of strike assets with the necessary range are deployed on the territory of Ukraine. In the event of a Russian attack, all of them are activated, and that means the Kremlin is no more. Or at least the place where one of those replicants is sitting. These days you can't even tell them apart, all those 1.5-meter tall Kremlin types. So in general, there are only two guarantees, some other kinds of guarantees. We'll give you a piece of paper, like a Budapest Memorandum 2 or some foreign troops that will immediately pull out if anything happens. No, the main guarantee is serious weaponry. Even better would be to get back part of the nuclear arsenal. But I understand that's impossible. So we'll have to rely on our own resources, as they say. And one more piece of news. Remember, I recently mentioned that Senator Graham, a fellow party member of Donald Trump, said that we need to impose tough sanctions against Russia, so we'll try to attach the sanctions package to the mandatory government funding package. In other words, so that it will definitely be voted for. And so today there's news that there is practically no chance that Senator Graham's initiative to introduce these sanctions will be included. Well, that's logical because his leader, the party's president, not the party leader, but the president, announced how sanctions will now be imposed. That first, all of Europe, or rather everyone, NATO should stop buying Russian oil. And Orban immediately rubbed his little fly-like hands together. Now I'm gaining influence again. Why is Orban gaining influence for Putin? Because now it depends on Orban. And by the way, also on Erdogan. Turkey buys a lot of Russian oil too. It depends, you see, on what Trump does. Whether there will be sanctions or not, I doubt that they will completely stop buying. The question is something else. First of all, Trump is embarrassed, for some reason, to name those in Europe who are actually buying. Not in Europe, but in the North Atlantic Alliance. And Trump very skillfully twists cause and effect. That is, sanctions are needed so that Putin can't continue the war, so that he doesn't get money for his energy resources, not so that Orban or Erdogan stop buying up these remaining volumes. So these sanctions are against Putin, against Russia. So the excuse that someone else in Europe is still buying, it's a completely bogus excuse, and everyone understands that. It turns out Orban is so all-powerful that he won't let Trump impose sanctions against Russia. Yes, but right now we can at least try to get the most out of this situation, like start pestering Orban at every press conference, for example. Will Hungary stop buying Russian oil as Donald Trump demands or not? Let's see with this question. Well, I think they absolutely don't care over there. It feels like, it's a three-way game. 3 card sharps sat down at the table to play, all came up with a scheme in Putin's interests, who's interfering with whom, and why sanctions can't be imposed. And look, here's an interesting piece of news coming in. Russia has asked Turkey to return the S-400 systems it supplied due to a shortage of its own air defense systems. In other words, Moscow offered Ankara to buy back the systems it had previously delivered. These very S-400 air defense systems, since things aren't going so well in Russia. At the same time, Turkey, by the way, received these S-400s back in 2019. They hardly use them because, first of all, they don't meet NATO standards, and secondly, Turkey is developing its own air defense systems. And thirdly, in Iran, everyone saw how easily Russian air defense systems can be bypassed. Well, not easily, but it is possible. So Russia... What is the important message in this news? Russia has deployed all the systems it currently has. However, they still have obligations to customers to whom they've already sold systems. And now the deadlines are approaching. They say, Nima, everything is out there, everything is at the front somewhere. So they say, Turkey, give them back to us. We'll use these systems to fulfill some of our contractual obligations. But it's not a given that Turkey will return them. Well, Erdogan is very pragmatic. He might return them. And by the way, he will. This is definitely not a plus for his karma. And by the way, on this topic, Mr. Aliyev, he could talk to Erdogan, say that there's no need to return them to Russia, but then again, Erdogan makes his own decisions. So this shows that Russia is having major problems with air defense systems, especially in light of the recent strikes on Russian territory. Now drones are flying as far as 1,500 kilometers and hitting key critical targets, ports, terminals, and oil refineries. In fact, they're being hit every day. That's why Russia is now concerned about where to get air defense systems. But they won't be using these S-400s to shoot down drones. They're getting them, of course, to shoot down missiles, which means in the near future they expect more massive missile strikes. The question is, with what kind of missiles? From Ukrainian territory against Russian territory, and Ukrainian ballistic missiles, they should be appearing soon. As they say, the boss shows up at the last moment. We're waiting, really waiting for some big fiery greetings for the Russians, at the very least for oil refineries and military arsenals. And as for you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, don't forget. And let's support the fundraiser for our defenders for the separate brigade named after Bohdan Khmelnytsky. All the details and links are in the description to this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and of course, glory to Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.